I'm Cindy, 31, a school administrator who once thought family meant protection. For years, I swallowed the small hurts hoping one day they'd see me. But at our family dinner, my parents smirked across the table. $250K for your sister, but not $65K for your son. The room went still. They thought I'd stay quiet again. They were wrong. The clink of silverware and the smell of roasted turkey should have felt comforting, but that night, it all tasted like ash. My parents laughed with Claire, admiring the shimmer of her new bracelet, while my son's name never came up. I sat at the far end of the long oak table, the chair that always seemed to be waiting for me, half hidden behind a pillar. The candles threw soft light on their faces, but left mine in shadow. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been pushed aside by the people you trusted most? If you've felt that, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've been underestimated by family, hit subscribe. You'll want to see where this story goes. Claire raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said brightly, and everyone echoed her except me. The crystal chimed like tiny bells, each note another reminder of what they wouldn't spend to save my child. My father's watch glinted as he reached for more wine. My mother avoided my eyes, slicing ham with mechanical precision. The laughter rolled over me like warm water turning cold. I remembered the night I'd come to them trembling but hopeful with paperwork from the hospital folded neatly in a folder. I'd placed it on this same table and explained the treatment, the chance my son had if we could raise the money. "We'll think about it," my father had said, like he was declining an upsell. "You need to be realistic." That phrase still hummed in my ears now like a cruel refrain. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration for Claire's new house. She sat radiant in her designer dress, recounting the details of her upcoming trip to Europe. "We're taking the kids too," she added as if it were a casual afterthought. My mother clasped her hands in delight. I traced the rim of my water glass, feeling the condensation dampen my fingers. Their words blended into a muted buzz. I watched my father carve another slice of roast, my mother pass the rolls, Claire laugh at some joke her husband whispered. I wondered if any of them noticed the empty space where my son should have been sitting. The ache settled deeper in my chest, but I kept my face calm, my posture steady. Every detail etched itself into my mind, the expensive china, the scent of butter and herbs, the tiny flecks of candlelight in their eyes. They were so sure of their world, of their choices, of the hierarchy they'd built at this table. I could feel the familiar heat rising under my skin, the urge to speak, to shake them, to ask how they could choose a party over a life. But instead, I let the moment stretch, gathering itself like a held breath. Across the table, Claire leaned toward my parents. "It's good you stayed firm back then," she said softly, but not softly enough. "Sometimes tough love is best." She caught my eye, then a flicker of something, pity or triumph, crossing her face. The spoon slipped from my fingers and landed in my plate with a quiet chime. Everyone glanced up for a second, then went back to their food. I inhaled slowly, my hands folding in my lap. They thought I was beaten down, used to my corner seat and their silence. They didn't see the folder in my bag, the plan already in motion. They didn't know this would be the last dinner they'd ever see me small. I stayed quiet through the first courses, letting their words skim across me like stones skipping on water. My father told another story about Claire's new neighborhood, about the golf club membership she and her husband had just secured. My mother's earrings sparkled as she nodded, pride spilling from every movement. I reached for a roll, tore it slowly, watching the crumbs scatter like tiny grains of time. The clatter of cutlery and muted chatter filled the room. No one asked me about work, about my apartment, about the boy who wasn't there. They knew and didn't care to know more. I glanced at the empty, high-backed chair where Ethan used to sit before he got too sick to come. It had been pushed back against the wall, almost hidden like a memory they wanted gone. Claire's husband leaned in to whisper something. She laughed, a high-practiced sound. "It's funny," she said aloud, "how some people expect everything handed to them." Her eyes flicked toward me, quick as a match strike. My father smiled faintly, like he approved of the lesson being taught. I sipped my water, tasting nothing. In the background, the grandfather clock chimed, slow and deliberate. Each note felt like a reminder, this is who they are, this is where you stand. I set my glass down carefully, aligning it with the edge of my placemat. My hands were steady, but inside something settled heavy and certain. They didn't notice my stillness. They were used to it, mistaking silence for weakness. They'd forgotten how silence can hold its own weight, how it can be the edge of a blade. The room smelled of rosemary and roast, but I caught a whiff of cold air from the cracked window behind me, crisp and sharp like the night waiting outside. When dessert came out, a towering cake of layered chocolate, my mother turned to Claire. "You deserve this," she said softly. "You've worked so hard." The words hung between us, sticky and sweet. I thought of hospital bills, of nights on the floor by Ethan's bed, of the letter I'd once written asking for help and never sent. My fork traced slow circles on the plate. At the far end of the table, my father's voice dropped as he spoke of investments, of future plans. Claire nodded, asking questions. I could almost see the walls around them built of money and choices shutting me out, but I wasn't knocking anymore. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate, a small gesture but deliberate. It was the first movement I'd made that anyone noticed. Claire paused mid-sentence, glancing at me. My mother's smile flickered. My father kept talking, unaware. Inside me, the decision was already made. This dinner would be the last time they'd see me in this chair, quiet and invisible. They just didn't know yet. I let the moment linger, like the breath before a storm. Claire's voice grew brighter as the evening went on, her stories bigger, her gestures wider. She described the custom invitations for her wedding, the private chef for her daughter's birthday, the remodel of her kitchen, each detail a polished jewel offered for admiration. My parents leaned in, their faces soft with approval. I sat at the edge of the table, the only empty wine glass in front of me, the stem catching the chandelier light like a thin blade. At one point, my father tapped his glass with his spoon, a tiny chime that silenced the chatter. "We're just so proud of how far Claire has come," he said. "She's always been the responsible one." His eyes swept past me like I was another piece of furniture. My mother reached across to squeeze Claire's hand. "You deserve every bit of it, honey," she said, her bracelets clinking. I watched them with the same stillness I'd practiced for years, my fingers curled around my napkin, folding and unfolding it under the table. The smell of garlic bread and sweet wine made the air thick. Claire tilted her head and smiled at me, the kind of smile that hides a sting. "Not everyone can manage money well," she said lightly. "Some people just make bad choices." Her husband chuckled. A sound escaped me, a small breath like a laugh, but not. I reached for my water, steady as stone. Around me the conversation resumed, my absence in it complete. The old family photographs on the wall showed birthday parties, graduations, Claire's milestones lined up like trophies. Ethan wasn't in any of them. "Cindy," my mother said suddenly, "have you thought about looking for a second job? It might help." Her voice carried the same tone she used to recommend recipes. "Times are hard," my father added, "but you have to be realistic." The words fell like old coins, dull from use. I nodded once, not trusting my voice. Inside, the memories of hospital corridors, overdue bills, and nights spent awake pressed against me like a tide. I had been realistic. I had been silent. I had done everything alone while they looked the other way. My thumb traced the edge of my plate, the porcelain cool under my skin. Claire laughed again, a quick, sharp sound. "Maybe she's still hoping for a miracle," she said under her breath, but loud enough to land. My mother's smile didn't falter. My father poured himself more wine. No one looked at me. I lowered my gaze to my plate, not in shame, but to hide the flicker in my eyes. They thought they knew me, that silence meant surrender. They didn't see the folder waiting at home, the documents lined up like quiet witnesses. They didn't hear the countdown I'd already begun. The evening dragged on, every course another small performance. My parents admired the steak's perfect sear, complimented the wine Claire had chosen, and laughed at her husband's jokes about managing success. I stayed quiet, letting their words wash over me like background noise. It was easier than reacting. When dessert arrived, tiny cakes dusted with gold flakes, my father raised a toast. "To family," he said. The word landed heavy in my chest. His glass clinked against Claire's, then my mother's, but not mine. I kept my hands folded in my lap, the cool silver of my ring pressing into my palm. Claire glanced at me. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Cindy," she said. "Are you okay?" Her tone was light, but her eyes held that flicker of superiority I'd learned to recognize. My mother chimed in. "Maybe she's tired. Teaching must be so exhausting." The implication was clear. My life was small, my choices poor, my needs unimportant. I looked at them, each face glowing in the warm light, each smile practiced. I could have spoken then. I could have reminded them of hospital rooms, of bills stacked like bricks, of Ethan's small hand in mine. Instead, I pressed my lips together and nodded, once the gesture so slight it barely existed. The conversation turned to Claire's upcoming charity gala. She described the designer she'd hired, the auction items, the VIP guest list. My mother leaned in to whisper something about how lovely it will look on the society page. My father added, "It's important to invest in appearances." I felt the words scrape across old wounds. I excused myself to refill my water. As I stood at the counter, the laughter behind me swelled a bubble of sound that didn't include my name. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I saw myself holding the glass, my face calm, my shoulders straight. Years ago, I might have trembled. Not now. Returning to the table, I placed the glass down carefully. Claire was telling a story about her new house, my parents nodding along. "You should come visit sometime," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It might inspire you." I simply said, "Maybe," and nothing more. They didn't notice the shift. They didn't hear the quiet click inside me, the one that separated endurance from resolve. They went on eating and planning, oblivious. I sat back, absorbing every detail, knowing the time for silence was almost over. Saturday afternoon arrived cold and gray. My small living room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The documents I'd printed sat in a neat folder on the table, each page a quiet weapon. I'd arranged 3 chairs opposite mine, a simple stage for what was about to unfold. At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a knock. When I opened the door, my parents stood with Claire between them. My father's suit hung loose on his frame, my mother's hair was streaked with more gray than I remembered, and Claire clutched her designer purse like it might shield her. I stepped aside just enough to let them in. They sat together on the couch, close as children called before a principal. I stayed standing, the folder in my hands. My father began softly, "Thank you for seeing us, Cindy. We're desperate." His voice cracked on the last word. My mother added, "We'll sign anything you want. We just need to save the house." I set the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. "Before we talk about money," I said evenly, "I need you to answer some questions." My tone was calm, almost gentle, but it stopped them cold. Claire shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to the door. I slid the first document out, a printout of my old crowdfunding page with Ethan's photo. "Do you remember this?" I asked. My mother's hands trembled. "Cindy, please." My father cut in. "We've been over this." I tilted my head. "Have we?" Because I don't remember a real conversation. Another page followed the receipt from Claire's wedding planner. "This is $230,000 paid by you 18 months after you told me you couldn't afford $65,000 for your grandson's treatment." The paper landed on the coffee table like a gavel. Claire's face flushed. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Sit down," I said quietly, and she obeyed. One by one, I laid out the documents: venue, flowers, catering, dress, entertainment. Each page a piece of the past they had tried to bury. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's eyes filled. The air in the room grew dense, heavy with the weight of numbers and memory. My hands were steady. I'd waited 4 years for this moment, building my life brick by brick while collecting every scrap of evidence. Now in my small apartment, the truth lay bare between us. My father's voice finally broke the silence. "What do you want from us, Cindy?" "An apology." "Fine. We're sorry. We made a mistake." His words fell flat, more like a transaction than remorse. "A mistake," I repeated softly, setting down the last photo: Ethan in his hospital bed, eyes half-closed, tubes and monitors crowding his small body. "This is what your mistake cost." My mother's sob cracked the air. Claire looked away, her nails biting into her palm. My father stared at the photo, unreadable. "We didn't know he was going to die," my mother whispered. I looked directly at her. "Yes, you did. The doctors told you. I told you. You knew and you chose differently." I placed the photo back into the folder with care. "I'm willing to give you the 90,000, I said. Hope flashed across their faces like a desperate flare. "But there are conditions." "Anything," my father said quickly. "We'll sign whatever you want." "It's not about signatures," I replied. "It's about truth. First, you acknowledge right here out loud that you had the money and chose Claire's wedding over Ethan's life. I want to hear you say it." Claire leaned forward. "You don't have to do this. She's just trying to humiliate you." "Yes," I said evenly, "I am. Just like you humiliated me when I begged for help. Just like when I buried my son alone because you had a rehearsal dinner." My father's shoulders sagged. We chose the wedding," he said at last, his voice barely audible. "We had the money and we spent it on Claire's wedding instead of Ethan's treatment." And I prompted. "And he died because we didn't help," he finished, his eyes closing. My mother's lips trembled. "We should have helped you," she whispered. "We should have saved him. We were wrong." I turned to Claire. "And you? What's your part in this?" She hesitated, her face stiff. "I didn't know," she said, finally, the words thin. I let the silence stretch, then slid the check across the table. "Second condition, you take this money, you save your house, and you never contact me again. No calls, no cards, no pretending I still exist. The way you erased Ethan." My mother flinched as if struck. My father opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "You have 60 seconds to decide." They looked at each other. A silent calculation flickered between them, pride weighed against desperation. It took 43 seconds. My father picked up the check. "We accept your conditions," he said, his voice hollow. "Sign the document next to it," I said. They bent over the paper, hands shaking. Claire's signature came last, a slash of anger on the page. When they finished, I collected the papers and handed them the check. "You can go now." They stood subdued, my mother crying softly. My father's shoulders slumped. Claire's chin lifted, but her eyes were wet. They filed out without another word. I closed the door behind them, the latch clicking like the end of a chapter. In the quiet, I walked to my bedroom and opened my laptop. The bank balance showed 12,000 left years of careful saving, reduced to almost nothing. But the real work wasn't over. I composed an email to Aunt Teresa, attaching the timeline, the documents, Ethan's photo. My fingers hovered over the send button. I thought of every hospital room, every phone call unanswered, every smile at someone else's celebration while my son faded. Then I clicked send. By tomorrow, everyone would know. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages from cousins and distant relatives. Aunt Teresa had done exactly what I knew she would, forwarded my email to her entire network. By midday, screenshots of my timeline and documents were circulating in group chats and on Facebook threads. Comments poured in beneath old family photos, questions whispered in church pews and murmurs at the country club. The story they had tried to bury was no longer a secret. I scrolled past the messages without replying. Each new notification felt like a quiet knock on the wall I'd built between us. For years, they'd crafted an image of generosity and grace. Now everyone could see the cracks. People who had once admired them were stunned. Some unfriended them. Others left blunt remarks about priorities and decency. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to. That evening, there was a knock at my door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Claire standing alone. Her face was pale with fury and something else, fear. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "You signed an agreement not to contact me," I said quietly. She clenched her fists at her sides. "That email you sent," she hissed. "You're ruining their lives. You're vindictive. You're cruel." "I'm telling the truth," I replied. "There's a difference. They gave you $90,000, she snapped. "They're losing everything because of you." I stayed still, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the door. "They gave me back a fraction of what they denied Ethan," I said calmly. "And they only did it because they had no choice. You're never going to let this go, are you?" Her voice cracked. "You're going to hate us forever." I shook my head. "Hate requires caring. I stopped caring a long time ago. You stopped being my family the day you chose a party over my son's life. Now you're just strangers with my last name." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move closer. "Mom is devastated. Dad looks broken. Was it worth it?" I looked past her at the dim hallway. "Ask Ethan if it was worth it," I said softly. "Oh, wait. You can't." Her face crumpled at the words. For a moment she seemed about to speak, but nothing came out. Then she turned and walked away down the hall, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. I watched until she disappeared around the corner. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, feeling the cool wood against my back. No shouting, no satisfaction, just a steady quiet. For the first time in 4 years, my hands weren't shaking. The truth was out and the silence felt like strength. In the weeks that followed, I heard through indirect channels what was happening. My parents were indeed socially ostracized. Friends stopped calling. Their church attendance dwindled to nothing. The country club quietly declined to renew their membership. They kept their house, but it became a prison of sorts, a reminder of choices they could never undo. I learned that my father eventually found part-time consulting work, earning a fraction of what he once made. My mother developed anxiety and began therapy, but she never reached out to me again. Their Christmas cards, which had once been elaborate productions full of smiling photos and handwritten notes, stopped coming entirely. Someone told me my mother had begun telling people I was dead. It was easier than explaining why her daughter wanted nothing to do with her. I supposed, in a way, she was right. The version of me who had swallowed pain to keep the peace, who had accepted being second best, who had begged for scraps of attention, that woman no longer existed. As for me, I built a different life. I dated again, but carefully letting trust grow slowly. I made real friends, the kind who showed up when things were hard, who dropped off soup unasked, who sat quietly and listened. I traveled to places Ethan would have loved and scattered his ashes in beautiful locations around the world. With each handful of wind-blown dust, I felt lighter, more grounded. I lived for both of us now. The $90,000 I had given my parents was worth it. Not because they deserved help, but because it gave me closure. It was proof to myself more than anyone that I was the better person, the one who showed mercy, even when none had been shown to me. I had handed them a lifeline and a mirror at the same time. What they saw reflected back was up to them. Some might say I was cruel. That real forgiveness means letting go completely, helping without conditions. But those people never watched their child die alone while their family celebrated elsewhere. They never had to choose between electricity and medicine. They never had to bury their baby with borrowed money while knowing a small fortune had been spent on cake and flowers. I gave my parents what they had asked for, but on my terms. I lived up to my obligation as their daughter one final time, and then I closed that door forever, just as they had closed the door on Ethan when he needed them most. In the end, it wasn't revenge. It was justice, balance, consequence. They had taught me that family was conditional, that love had limits, that some lives mattered more than others. I simply returned their lessons wrapped in a check they couldn't refuse and a truth they couldn't escape. And then I moved forward into a future they would never be part of, carrying Ethan's memory with me, finally at peace. The door closed softly behind her, and the hallway went still, like dust settling after a storm. In that quiet, Cindy didn't feel triumphant, just steady whole. Some wounds never heal, but dignity can still grow where love once failed. And sometimes silence speaks the clearest truth of all.